Right, good morning everybody and welcome to this session. My name is Mike Gooding. I was just looking at that slightly disturbing picture there, and I can assure you I have changed the shirt since that photo was taken. I didn't realise how poor my wardrobe had become and a few options there were. I rather like the idea that this is Speaker's Corner, because that says to me I can bang on about whatever I want to for about 40 minutes or so. Which I'll do, but if anybody wants to get up and leave, don't worry, I won't be at all offended by it. It's not a problem, and hopefully when it starts raining in a minute we'll get more people in. If you think you've come to hear from Mike Gooding, who is in charge of the Royal Agricultural University, as it's called these days, that's a completely different Mike Gooding. So I'm not going to speak about any of the things that he would do, and I know over about what is now about 30 years of doing presentations. I've done a number of presentations which the other Mike was supposed to be doing, and he's done vice versa. I have to say he's always had much better gigs than I've had over the years, because they've always been the much posher presentations. Anyway, I'm going to primarily talk today about Farmers Fresh and Farmers First. And about the lamb trade. I'm going to do that because of the importance of the golden hoof to regenerative agriculture. But then I'm going to get to the banging on bits when I'm going to talk about what I think of the importance is thinking about different types of business structure and approach to our agriculture as we move forward. So that's when we'll go from the corporate discussion into something that's perhaps more holistic in thinking. Anyway, but I'm going to keep referring back to the Farmers Fresh model because I'll explain the history of the company in a minute, but it'd be interesting to know how many people have sheep in the audience at the moment and how many people are Farmers First shareholders. We've got one very enlightened gentleman in the third row. Well done, sir. And that's not an unusual response, although we've been in existence about 22 years, I think it's interesting how many people got involved at the start. So let me take you through a little bit about Farmers First. We now have two operating subsidiaries, two abattoirs, Farmers Fresh, one in Kenilworth in Warwickshire and one in Wrexham in North Wales. The holding company, the bit that the enlightened farmers have shares in, is called Farmers First, and I'm a director of Farmers First. It all had started back in the late 1990s with an initiative, a highly controversial initiative called Farmers Ferry. Some of you may remember the ferry. It started off with a group of 5 farmers from Wales who wanted to find markets for UK lamb, and at that time I was working in agricultural public relations in London, and these 5 guys came into my office in London and they said, we think we're going to restart the live export sheep industry and we think we might have some public relations issues to deal with. And I said, yes, absolutely, and there's the door, off you go. Anyway, we did get into a bit of a conversation, and they said 2 things to me at that first meeting which have remained true to the business all the way through to today. One is that we must find market-based solutions to the problems of low lamb price. If we can stimulate markets and create the demand side to the equation, we have a chance. And the second thing they said to me was, we know it's going to be a controversial business, so whatever we do, we must do it properly. We have a strong view associated to the values of doing the job properly, particularly when it's so controversial. And it was a bit of a helter-skelter ride, I have to say, from an initial discussion, which I think was in May. By the middle of August, we got our own ship and we were sailing out of Dover and we were shipping animals across the channel, and that's the ship there. And the very astute amongst you will notice that it actually flies under the French tricolour, the flag. It was a French ship that we hired. The saviour of the UK sheep industry was a French ship. There's irony for you in these days. So the mission of the business then remains the mission of the business today. And I'm going to return to this point on a number of times through the presentation. It's to improve the returns to UK livestock producers through the development of trade. That was true 22 years ago, and it is true today. And for us, and I think for any of us in business, one of the really important things is to understand why you are in business and what really matters to you. So for us, at the end of the day, profit is not the only determination of success. If we can generate profit and return it to shareholders through dividend, that's one obvious route. But there are other things that are important to us, and important to us as a wider farming community, that mean this sort of cooperative ethos is very, very relevant. So that was the ferry, and the ferry, don't worry about reading all the bits, I'll go through some of the salient points. The ferry was very important because it got us up and running and it got us going. It meant an awful lot of challenges in terms of communications, not least of which the lobby against frankly any livestock agriculture, but also particularly against something as controversial as moving live animals. The ferry actually had a limited life because it was pretty obvious that there would come a time, once we had cleared the surplus lamb out of the UK market, which was dominated by a limited number of retail buyers, effectively operating well, if not a cartel, certainly a sort of oligopoly, that we, once that was broken, we would start to see sheep prices rise. Interestingly, from a communication point of view, it took 2 years before we saw that turn in sheep price. It took that long to get the surplus out of the market that was then not used as leverage by the buyers in the market to beat the farm gate price of lamb down. That was an interesting communication challenge in itself. But it was obvious that once you've got the price of lamb up, it becomes uneconomic to move live animals. It's not an efficient way of moving a commodity. The obvious issues about particular health and welfare considerations, but just the logistical challenges of moving live animals as opposed to moving either carcasses or boxes is pretty obvious, really. And it was fairly obvious that we would quickly reach a glass ceiling. So the business moved on a couple of years after the ferry started, and it also moved on because you'll remember at that time we had foot and mouth. And we were in Paris at a big food event in Paris, and I remember getting a call saying, get back to the then Minister's office, Nick Brown in London, for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, because something is going to happen and we can tell you you're not sailing your ship anymore. So that's how quickly that happened, and that completely stopped the movement of any animals or meat across to the continent. By that time, we had already started the abattoir operation, and the abattoir operation had started because of this obvious extension we had to move beyond moving live animals into carcasses. So we had a share issue, and something like 2,750 farmers bought shares in the company, and that's still roughly the same number of shareholders that exist today. So about 2,750 farmers across the UK, and we have shareholders in just about every county of the country, own a share in Farmers First. One of the things that I will always remember is the share issue was based on a minimum shareholding of 100 ewes. You paid a pound per ewe and could buy 100 shares effectively. Guess what the average size of a UK flock was all those years ago? It was exactly 100 sheep. So that tells you about how we as farmers, and I'm speaking as a farmer today, if you like, put ourselves into initiatives. It was tentative. But we're very grateful to those 2,750 shareholders who bought shares. No individual can own more than 5% of the company. And I'm going to go on, and when we reflect at the end of this presentation about what's important about our values, that was very specifically put in place so that nobody could buy an influence in the business. And that's become very, very relevant to the business as it has grown over the years. I think this is the 4th year or 5th year we'll make a dividend payment, 10p per share is what it'll be this year. It's what the shareholders voted for. And the majority of the board are farmers. Now that is a double-edged sword, I have to say, because, and I can say this as being a farmer, If you are going to try and run a scaled commercial business, farmers are not necessarily the best managers of that business. I'll put it as tactfully as I can, really. One of the successes of this business has been we've employed the best people that we could afford when we've needed them, recognising both their skill sets and our inadequacies. That's quite a difficult lesson, I think, for many of us to learn. So it's run by an executive team. It has a board of farmers, or where the majority of farmers that sit over the top of it. We buy 50% of our stock direct into the plants, and increasingly farmers want to deliver stock straight into the abattoir. But we also procure about 50% of the stock over the year through about 70 different livestock markets all over the country. It's important for us as a business to be seen and actually to be active out all over the country, whereas if you were looking at it in strictly commercial terms, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it. All stock, and the way we differ as a business from other processors is all stock is actually procured to fulfil specific orders. So fundamentally, what we do is we buy stock today to fulfil an order tomorrow that's been sold. What we don't do is go out and buy stock speculatively today to try and sell for a profit. And this is a really important point, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is develop trades to increase the farm gate price of lamb. Not to go out and try and buy as cheaply as we can, in other words, screw the farm gate price down, and then try and create a profit. So it's a fundamentally different business model. We now procure, or we were up until last year, I'll come on to this year that we just experienced, about 1 million lambs a year. So that is 10%, roughly 10% of the UK's lamb production is going through the farmer cooperative business with these specific set of values and ethos. That 1 million lamb is quite important, and I know I suppose it might be a bit of a challenge to speak at the same time as the Minister is on at the moment, but we do know how the politicians love a round number and a headline. So the 1 million lambs a year is quite an important figure. In all seriousness, what it does for us as a business is it gives us enough clout in the marketplace to actually make a difference. And when a farmer's fresh buyer is in the market, it makes a difference to the market price that day. We now have a turnover of about £100 million in the business. That's why it's important that the farmer board directors don't make the business decisions at the end of the day. And about 75% of that turnover is through the export markets. So we export about 75% of the lamb. And almost 100% of those exports go into the European market. Okay? We love the French. We love the French because they love our lamb. And I have to say that the last couple of weeks of December and the first week of January was a very nervous 3-week period for the business. Because the reality is, if we hadn't had a deal and been able to continue to trade, that would almost certainly have wiped the business out. So it was a difficult few weeks. We started trading again on the 2nd of January, and I'll talk to you about some of the challenges that has brought. We export about 2% into non-EU markets. This is fascinating, because in that other tent over there, the Minister will be banging on about global trade and the opportunities to go and sell lamb all over the world. It's just not the reality of what happens in a trading environment. Simply turning up and waving your Union Jack does not guarantee a single sale. And we do not sell any lamb and make a single extra euro cent based on the fact that it's British or Welsh or Northamptonshire. So be very careful about the panaceas that would suggest that there is a wealth of opportunity out there, but it's not easy. And you must remember that wherever you go in the world to try and sell lamb, there are 2 things that are guaranteed. You'll come across a Kiwi and an Aussie who've already been there for 20 years doing an exceptionally good job, and you're proposing to push them out of place and to try and earn some added value. It's pretty obvious, really. And I hope running through the whole of my presentation today is a hefty dose of reality and scepticism, because really it's not that difficult when you think about it. It's blindingly obvious what we're dealing with. We export to about 12 countries. We do some to North America, into Canada, and we're trying to do some stuff in the Middle East at the moment, which is really where we come across Aussies and Kiwis. Australia have supported their farming industry to fly lamb into the Middle East through the last 12 months. You just can't compete with somebody whose transport costs are picked up for them. That's the reality of the situation. One of the other key things about this unique business model is we do no retail trade. We do not supply any supermarkets. And any of you who are thinking about your end market opportunities and where your lamb might be going, there's a very specific reason why we don't do retail trade. Because once you're locked into that environment and you think that there's the sort of golden utopia at the end of the day, and then the buyer wants to do a price promotion or expects your product to be supported in the supermarket, it becomes very, very difficult. Now, I'm not saying that retail is not an opportunity, and indeed some direct retail over this last year has been shown some tremendous growth. But as a business, what we've been trying to do is influence the large volume in the marketplace. That's really where the Farmers First business has been aimed. So I hope that running through that little bit of history about business and its setup, you can see that there are some fundamental different points about business. We buy to fulfill orders. We don't buy to sell and try and make profit. We're there to try and increase the demand side of the equation in the hope that that helps the price of lamb rise. We have a mixture of procurement to suit the industry as opposed to suit the business. That is a key value for us in the business. And you have to get to a significant size to have any real influence in the marketplace. None of us thought 22 years ago we'd ended up with a 100 million turnover business on our hands, shifting 10% of the lamb in the UK. So it has been quite a journey. So why do we bother with all of this? This little graph on the bottom left-hand side was actually my pre-Brexit prediction of what will happen with the price of lamb. So when we go on to talk about what the price of lamb is going to be in the future, when you look at that graph, you realise that I have no idea what I'm talking about. Okay, I thought if we had a deal, it might go up a bit, but we would stay in about the same place. If we didn't have a deal, we would be following the orange line, and we would be out of business anyway. Neither of those two things have happened. And it's really actually very simple O-level economics for those of you who did O-level economics. That shows my age, it might have been GCSE. It is no more than a function of supply and demand, and that's exactly what we're seeing going on in the world at the moment. There are nuances that get in the way of those trading arrangements, but that is exactly what it is about. The UK market for many years has been dominated by very few retail buyers, and since the invention of the mobile phone, that ability to manage the market and manage the market price just went through a sort of exponential degree of influence. Retail buyers are all looking for the same product. They all want an R3L 19-20 kilo lamb. Lambs just don't grow like that. Livestock farming is just not like that. The beauty of the European market and the wider market is there is a market for big ones, small ones, fat ones, thin ones, a bit of everything. And what we've tried to do is stay nimble on our feet and exploit those different markets. Because when you don't find a market out there for those out-of-supermarket spec lambs, they're the leverage that is used in the market to drive the price down. So this, if I spoke to our auditor about this, he would say something along the lines of, you should concentrate on your core skills, and you should consolidate, and you should focus. And by the way, why do you want 2,750 farmer shareholders all over the country? Why not have 4 institutional cornerstone investors in the business? Actually, I think that diversity in the business, both in its customer base and in its ownership, are 2 of the biggest strengths in the business. And when we think about regenerative agriculture and the importance of diversity, that's why I wanted to do this presentation today. I think there's a lot of similarities in the thinking in the 2 different scenarios. Traditionally, the UK has exported about 40% of its lamb production. That varies during the season. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But again, it goes back to basic geography. We have a warm, temperate, moist climate with fertile soils, which grows great grass. It's pretty obvious where the potential use of that grass can go. And I think we should use those natural advantages in a truly sustainable way, of course, to provide land for other parts of the world. That's why the EU market is so important to us. So let's get on to the nitty-gritty of land prices, and with the caveat of what I just said, which is I have no idea what I'm talking about anyway. But here's some stats for this year. This year is the orange line, and the blue line is last year. And any of you, if you've been selling lambs this season already, will have known it has been a phenomenally high price. Prices that none of us as farmers could really have dreamt of. It's come back, and it's coming back quickly. It was $5.80 a kilo on Monday. I think we're on $5.40 today. So we are now seeing that movement in the marketplace. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. My prediction, it won't drop below £5. Okay, so if that's reassuring for you in the audience, it's reassuring for me as a sheep farmer, I have to say. I think if you're struggling to make money at £5 a kilo, then you need to have a serious look at your sheep enterprise. That would be my observation. Why is it going to stay at $5.80? There's a lot of hungry people in the world, and there's not a lot of lamb. It's as simple as that. And if we can balance our domestic UK consumption with our export opportunities, we have really good, I think, very exciting future ahead of us. We do have a lot to do, though, if we are going to open up and get a foothold in some of those different markets. This is quite interesting because this is the supermarket lamb prices over this last week, or 19th of June this was. Can you see that they're all starting to drop? They're either, or 2 of them are level, but all of them have slightly come back. I think this is the effect of the opening up after the COVID pandemic. I think this is people going out to eat. Something extraordinary happened during the lockdown, which was everybody was stuck at home and fell in love with cooking again, apparently. But what was very clear is when they went back to their, careful how we say this, limited cooking skills, what they could do is shove a leg of lamb in the oven and roast it, but they couldn't do anything more imaginative that you might see on MasterChef. So the demand for those cuts, those roasting cuts like legs of lamb, went up, and we've seen those lamb prices increase, and we've seen things like farm shops and home deliveries and things like that really put a strong demand in the domestic market. I think what we're seeing the first signs of now is people going out to eat. So they'll stop buying those legs of lamb to cook at home. We all hope they'll continue to do it, but I don't think they will, and I think people's behaviour is actually quite predictable. I did hear from somebody the other day who is involved in the logistics and distribution for one of those very large catering businesses, and I understand that halloumi wedges are the things that are in biggest demand at the moment for people to sit outside in pubs and eat. So we will lose out lamb sales to halloumi wedges, and I think that's what's happening with the price. So I think the demand side of the equation is going to ease. I'm not saying get into halloumi, but I think it will ease. And those are the reasons why. We see something slightly different in the beef market. Any of you who have beef as well will have seen better prices. But there's pressure on the beef market. I think we'll see the same things going on around purchasing decisions by consumers. But also, once they're going out to eat, they'll only eat about 3 different things: steak and something that's made out of mince. So you see this inevitable mincing of the carcass and the devaluation of the carcass, which as beef farmers we've experienced for the last few years. And I think we'll see a return to that over the coming months, which will put some pressure on the beef price. The other essential difference between the beef sector and the lamb sector is there isn't a farmers first operating in the beef sector. Now, I don't just say that to big up the influence of what we've managed to achieve in the lamb sector, but it is pretty obvious that there isn't that competition from a different buying element in the market. I find it actually much more interesting to look at what the Kiwis are up to and the Australians, because actually that's going to have a bigger effect on the business, I think, than anything else. Here's some stuff from Lamb and Beef New Zealand. And I was listening to a presentation, it was a few months ago now, from a guy at Beef and Lamb New Zealand, who was saying that they can only fulfil 60% of their quota for lamb into the Chinese market because of their limited supply of lamb. Now that fills me with confidence when you hear things like that, because they have very clearly tilted their business to that Asian Pacific market. And if the Kiwis and the Aussies are going to focus on China and the Asian market and leave Europe alone, that's the greatest opportunity for us here in the UK. It doesn't mean we should exclude the opportunity of getting to Asia, and there are some opportunities to get to Asia, but I have to say, with the sorts of products that you're talking about, frozen mutton and those sorts of 6-way type cut product, you're not talking in the high value, added value end of the market. And if we as producers want to see the farm gate price of lamb up, you have to be very careful about what you're providing into those sort of commodity type markets, as well as the logistical challenge of moving things to the other side of the world. It is relatively easy to fill, a refrigerated truck and drive under the channel and into the European market. It's very much more difficult to get it to the other side of the world. And there's one key difference that we have, and this is what I always bump into with Kiwis and Aussies at trade fairs. They've invested and had to invest heavily in their industry over the last 20 years, particularly with the subsidy removal. So they have got really high quality processing plants. We still have plants in the UK that are largely a manual process. So if you came into the abattoir and saw what was happening, when you cut the pelt, you pull it down, and then you have somebody who punches the pelt out on one side, holding it with one hand and punching with the other, and then with the hand that they've just been holding a dirty pelt with, they hold the other flank and they punch it down the other side. And what you get is effectively a smear of bacteria down the outside of the carcass. That immediately reduces your shelf life. So when we turn up in Qatar or Saudi Arabia, we've got a great product alongside a great Kiwi product. We have great sustainability credentials. They have great sustainability credentials. We're at the same price, because you have to be to compete in the market, at the same price. And they have a 90-day shelf life because they have a much more, a cleaner, more invested processing system, and we have a 30-day shelf life. It's a fairly easy decision for the buyer. Actually, what we've got to do in agriculture is invest and extend our capacity to be able to deal with the demands of the global market. And at a time when lamb is at £6, well, £5.40 a kilo, we should be investing in our future as opposed to waiting to when it's £3 a kilo and we're on our arse and we haven't got any money to spend anyway. So the Kiwis, I find it fascinating, and if you look at the proportion of lamb that they've been sending to Europe as opposed to China and the Asian market, and when you look in their list of opportunities and challenges, all the opportunities are in the Asian market. So let them crack on with it, and we'll perhaps fill in some of the spaces where they can't deliver. The other thing I often hear is that global farm gate prices, it's much easier and it's cheaper in New Zealand. If you look at it at the processing level, the farm gate price of lamb in Australia and New Zealand, which is the orange and sort of greeny coloured lines, as opposed to the blue line for GB over the last decade, have got much closer. So the cost of the lamb going into the abattoir is much more aligned than it used to be. It's more aligned. I'm not saying it is the same, but it is more aligned. They've just got greater processing efficiency in their system because of this investment. And if we're now going to go to Ireland to get some information about deadweight prices, you can see there the Australian and New Zealand deadweight price. It was much closer back in October. It has come apart. And as you see, the UK price, the Great Britain price, which is the orange line, and the line price is now up with where the French price is when you take out all the variations of currency. Okay, so we're living in a slightly odd environment at the moment. That's why I do believe that demand and supply will keep lamb price up, but there is a price gap opening up just at the moment between here and Australia and New Zealand, and that will affect our ability to trade around the world. So that's the bit about lamb pricing and where I think it's going to go. I think there's every reason to be confident, and if you can't make profit at £5 a kilo deadweight, then I think you have different questions to ask yourself. But I think there's every reason to be optimistic. I have to say, if tariffs had been slapped on the 1st of January, that would have been the end of it. I'm still convinced that that would have been our outcome. So provided that stays in place, and provided the policy follows that, then I think we have an opportunity. What the hell has this got to do with regenerative agriculture? Thank you for nodding at me. Now we get to the point, hopefully. I've tried to allude to this through the discussion, the differences between the Farmers First business, why we set it up and how we set it up, and how we continue to operate with what I think we need to do in agriculture as farmers and regenerative agriculture. I do have worries, I have to say. Now, my background is agriculture. I went to an excellent agricultural college down in Devon called Silhain before it got shut. But one of the things that I did learn all of those years ago, and this is going back to the mid-1980s, where I was largely trained as a conventional farmer, and that tonnes per hectare and litres per cow were the key performance indicators. It was a quite different environment, but I did learn at Silhain that I should always challenge the perceived wisdom and square in my own mind what the thinking was behind things. And since then I've been doing various roles in agriculture, including commercial farming operations here in the UK, in Brazil and in China. And it became very obvious to me some years ago that I was putting this huge amount of effort into throwing loads of things onto my crops and into my animals that were not giving me a sensible return. And then when I thought about it more, about the impact of that form of production, it made me personally, less and less comfortable with what I was doing. So a number of years ago, I went to low input systems and concentrated on the health of my animals, having the right animals for the particular environments I was farming in. I farmed for 7 years in North Oxfordshire on the flood meadows, where these once-in-a-lifetime flooding events used to happen about 3 times a year. So I used to have, I couldn't cultivate lots of the land. I rented 1,850 acres from about 50 different landlords. So it was a complex business where I had to keep nimble and things moving on their feet, and they had to look after themselves. So I went down the route of Kiwi genetics so that things looked after themselves. I culled out any ewes that had lameness. I married my farm vet as a cost reduction measure. That was a crap strategy, I have to say. But Ruth did all the work on the 5-point lameness reduction program, which those of you who are in sheep will hopefully know something about. And we just stopped having lame sheep. And I went from losing money on sheep to making money on sheep. And we started to focus on the important things around the animals' health and welfare. And I think those sorts of principles, you know, you'll see all over the sites today, and people talking about very similar things. What worries me, I have to say at the moment, is and Ruth tells me I should be very careful about how I express these views. I can see the sort of religious fundamentalism creeping into regenerative agriculture. And I think that's dangerous, and we've seen it in other areas of agriculture over the years. I think we've seen a completely pointless organic versus conventional debate, which has been nothing but destructive to everybody involved. What we've tried to do in Farmers First is take that cooperative principle that we're trying to do things for much wider, more holistic reasons in our business model and our business, and I think it's exactly the same is true in our agriculture today. So there will be a few fundamental zealots around here today who may well be speaking on various stages, and I think we have to be very careful about it because there are many good things to learn. And at the end of the day, I always reflect in my darker moments that actually the Norfolk 4-course rotation was a bloody good idea. And it might be a couple of 100 years ago, but actually me as a farmer, I found that I've had to relearn skills that I had lost because of my conventional training back in a period where more litres per cow and more tonnes per hectare was how I was judged in my performance. So it's time to think differently. That's my message. We're now getting onto the soapbox bit. I really do think we've got to take a much more strategic approach to our thinking, both as farmers, but also as business leaders. And actually, it's down to the decisions we make, whether it's as consumers, whether it's as business managers and owners of business leaders, or whether it's in our wider approach to agriculture and the environment. I chaired the Oxford Farming Conference back in 2013 it was, and I commissioned a research report from a chap called Michael Winter at the University of Exeter. And I asked Michael and his team to try and put a value against the environment and the ethical performance of agriculture alongside its gross domestic product. And we issued a report at the conference, which you can still find on the Oxford Farming Conference website if you look for it. It's a fascinating report. Michael said to me at the beginning, you can't do that. It won't be statistically valid. I said, let's not worry too much about that, Michael. Let's have a go and see what we can do. And our best estimation, or his best estimation to come out of that report, that the value of agriculture to wider society in terms of our environmental performance, the things that we add to community, biodiversity, health and well-being, and all of those other values was roughly equivalent to the gross domestic product. So I can't remember now off the top of my head how many £1 billion worth of gross domestic product we had, but Michael estimated that the same was being delivered by us as farmers to wider society, but was not actually understood in its value. I'd strongly recommend you go back and dip into that report and have a look at it when you've got nothing else to do. What was fascinating about when it was presented at the farming conference was half the audience, it went straight over their head, and I was pilloried by that half of the conference as the chairman for commissioning this report. The other half of the audience either said, yes, that's right, or that's very interesting, I'm going to have to go and think that one through. I think we've got a lot of thinking and different thinking to do as agriculture, and we certainly have to make a more holistic understanding of what we deliver, how we deliver it, and what it means to wider society. I do think it's interesting, although also slightly frustrating. If you look at how many farming programs there are on Channel 5 these days, and you see the interest in Clarkson's escapades in the Cotswolds, I think most of Middle England actually has a genuine interest in its food, where it comes from. What goes slightly wrong is when they walk through the doors of the retailer and fill their basket, and that's where we have to continue to work as farmers. Now, lamb itself is the best superfood. The lamb cutlet even comes on its own biodegradable stick. I mean, what more could you want? As well as omega-3, omega-6 balance, dense nutrition, all sorts of things that actually as farmers we're not very good at articulating. I think we've got to raise our game there. And we do really have to recognise the difference between fantasy and reality. The market for lamb around the world is really straightforward. Kiwis and Aussies are doing a damn good job with a great product. If we want to compete against them, we've got to find a way to compete against them. You can forget all the other stuff. And a trade difference with Australia will make zero difference to the amount of lamb we sell to Australia. I'll cover that one off now. That's a very, very easy one. I have to say, for 20 years we've been exporting to third countries and non-EU countries. It's always a hassle, and there's always lots of paperwork. We now just have to do it in shed loads to get into Europe as well. So there's no difference. And there's nobody out there who can provide any real practical help. We've had to put 2 full-time staff on, one in each plant, to do nothing else but fill out custom declaration forms to keep moving. And we're relatively lucky. We sell whole lorry loads, send whole lorry loads of carcasses or whole lorry loads of lamb cuts to one destination. If you are dealing with multiple loads, or loads where there are multiple products going to multiple locations across Europe, you would not bother. And many people aren't bothering, which is why you see the reduction in a lot of the export to EU figures. We had no choice. If we didn't find a way to do it, we would have been out of business on the 1st of January. It wasn't there was no choice to make. And it's interesting, the only way we have made it work is by working with our customers on the other side of the channel to effectively pull things through from Calais. So we get them to Calais and they take responsibility and share the cost to take them through to the rest of Europe. Much better to have a Frenchman argue with a French border official than an Englishman argue with a French border official. It's obvious really, isn't it? It's not rocket science. So the lessons we've learned: be very clear about our business objectives, understand our competition, very focused on those things, critically assess our offering. I'm going to far too many presentations and meetings, particularly with farming unions. And I remember going into one with the High Commissioner of Pakistan, where a very high-ranking farming union official, who remain nameless, said, we have the best lamb in the world produced to the highest quality. And the Commissioner from Pakistan said, by what measure and who says so? And there was a long pregnant pause in which nothing was said, and then we started to talk about the realities of trade. So we've got to understand really what our offering is and critically assess it. We are not as good as other parts of the world because of their investment in their processing over the last 20 years. Always try and employ the best people who are more intelligent than you. That goes to all business life. Very easy in some cases. Align with your partners. Maybe our opportunity with Australia is to think quite differently about how we work with the Australians. There's a thought for you. Make sure you're around the table. There's no good bleating on about it from the outside and not getting involved. Make sure you get paid, which is always a challenge in the meat sector, particularly the wholesale meat market, and make sure you have enough capital for your business venture, because that becomes really difficult, really difficult. So I hope that what I've tried to do over the last 45 minutes or so, talk about the lamb market, where I think it's going, because it's very important from a regenerative agriculture outlet point of view, but also try and use the lessons of that business model to think about perhaps what we do both as farmers and in the wider agricultural environment. Thank you very much. We've got quarter of an hour, haven't we? If anybody wants to ask any questions, I'm very happy to bang on for hours.
I mean, here today, a lot of people putting cover crops in, cash crops or the same or whatever. Will we see such a big increase in land production because everybody's grazing that may sort of flood the market having that much?
Yeah, I mean, you do get those supply fluctuations, and there will be some for the very reasons that you talk about. Although what has driven the land price over this spring in the last few months, people are eating more land, but actually the supply has been very restricted. Lots of people cleared out of stock ahead of Brexit, getting nervous that the export market would collapse. So we saw a reduction. I can tell you what's happening now. Cull ewes are extremely or historically high values because people are holding on to them because they want to increase their breeding stock. So you will see this cycle. You do see it in sheep, but it takes about 2 years for the effect to come through. Much longer cycle in the beef sector, much shorter in pigs, even shorter in chickens, and even shorter in fish. So it'll take a couple of years for that to come through. However, what I would observe is that, especially for any of you who are fundamentally arable farmers looking at incorporating sheep in your systems, you will generally take arable principles to how you drive your sheep enterprise. That will be a different mindset from somebody halfway up a mountain in the west of England. And that, I suspect, will mean a closer attention to end market and what needs to be produced and how you market that land. So I think there are lots of lessons to be learned. We will see some more supply come forward, but in the time that we've been speaking, there's another 10,000 people on the planet that need food. So I cannot see the demand for food suddenly dropping off the cliff. I have to say, I think if the world stopped wasting what it wasted, the pressure would come off us to produce, but I still think there'll be good market opportunities. The important thing to the question that you've asked is how you as a producer then interrelate with the abattoir. Now look, whether you take it to one of our abattoirs or whether it goes to somebody else, that's not the be-all and the end of it all for me. What does vary quite quickly is the demand for different things at different times. And understanding what we are looking to fulfil orders on is about staying in close contact with the abattoir and understanding what's going to happen over the coming weeks and drawing in exactly the right time. Chap over here, question.
Thanks very much for your presentation about the market. My question for you is, do you think there's a sustainability premium available out there?
Yeah, very, very good question. I wear various hats and I do various other things. I chair a veterinary research business and I do other things as well. And I've spent 15 years working within the sustainability environment. I'm very wedded to the idea that true sustainability is about economics, it's about the environment, and it's about ethics. Sustainability as an issue, I think, has become hijacked by carbon and nothing else. And that is very, very dangerous for us in agriculture. So if we go out onto the streets and we ask people about what sustainability means, the two things that come up are carbon, because it's all over the news, and plastic, because of David Attenborough's work. And I'm not belittling that at all. What an amazing raise in our public consciousness about plastics. I think we've got to fight hard in agriculture to demonstrate those sustainability values, which include ethics, community value, nutritional density of food, and some of the things that we've touched on today. Does it mean you can command a premium in the marketplace? Now remember, we deal in wholesale commodity markets. There is no premium. There is an expectation that it's produced to a certain standard, but we don't necessarily buy farm assured product, for example. doesn't earn us an extra euro cent. It becomes a baseline in the marketplace, and I think that's what we see in the domestic market. That does not mean, and I do it with my own lambs at home, that I take them to the small local abattoir and I flog them around the village and I earn a premium on them. It's not the panacea for all, and that's one of the other things that slightly keeps me awake at night, is that I hear lots of people talking about panaceas and blueprints as if that's going to make the difference for everybody. It does not work like that. Every farm is different, and usually it's the person that runs that farm that is the biggest difference to what happens on the farm. So the idea that you can have blueprints and do things like this, this and this, and it will give that predictable result is just a nonsense in a truly diverse, holistic approach. So yes, there'll be some opportunity, but not in the commodity markets. It will become the expectation. If you're really hungry, you'll buy halloumi wedges at Wetherspoons. And that'll be the buying decision.
Do you see much happening with the beef market in your business?
Yeah, I've sort of outlined what I see as the two fundamental differences between the beef sector. You don't mince lamb carcasses like you mince the beef carcass. There are big players that mince a lot of beef. Some of whom do some very good work, you know, it's not denying and make a huge difference in the marketplace. And you have an even tighter cartel on the buying side of the beef sector, who are largely based the other side of the Irish Sea. And whenever I see a company whose mission statement talks about shareholder value and the shareholders are the 5 members of the family, it's pretty obvious where the value is going to go. That's why I think the cooperative model is a better one for us potentially in the future.
Do you see yourself going into that?
Oh, I was hoping somebody wouldn't ask that. They always do. And we're often asked, will we go into beef? We don't know enough about the beef sector. That's.
You feel like it's something you should be finding out a bit more about and trying to do it?
Yeah, we have. What I do know is if certain Irish people wanted to take us out of the equation, it would be beer money to them. Very difficult to do in the beef sector. Farmers First, in the dark years when I wasn't involved in the business, in the middle years, did have a foray into it and lost a shed load of money. But that might be to do with what was happening in the management of the business at the time.
What do you feel that the food processors represent yourselves in the
Yeah, one of our pre-Brexit discussions was whether we should open an abattoir in France. Actually, now that would have made hiring a French ship look like a stroll in the park, wouldn't it? Yes, again, it's about capital. You know, we bought an abattoir, we acquired an abattoir in Wales 2 years ago. We spent a whole load of money on trying to do it up. You know, maybe the actual answer is that we should go out and we should build a completely new abattoir that can give us 90 days shelf life, and that we can compete in some of those global markets. These are big capital decisions to make, and they're multi-million-pound investments. You would have thought at this moment in time it would be relatively easy to turn up in Westminster or Cardiff and say, here's a very good business proposition, please give us, let's say 50% funding would be nice towards the capital costs. There is no money in the Treasury, it is an empty pot. There are much bigger things that society has to worry about than supporting the farming sector. I say that as a farmer, you know, that's the reality of it. Let's not kid ourselves. That's why going to the other presentation at 11 o'clock was a waste of time. You knew what he was going to say, and you knew what he wasn't going to answer. You're far more enlightened for having come to this presentation. I've just bought a wool duvet actually, so I'm trying to do my bit and behave sensibly. It's a travesty, is my thoughts about it. Let's talk about the wool as a resource. What a fantastic resource, and we should be finding much more imaginative ways. I'm hoping there might be somebody here today who's doing tree guards made out of wool, which I read about the other day. You know, if we can find those sorts of opportunities to do things, that's going to be great. Of course, this year it's been clobbered because no hotels have replaced their carpets. I produce New Zealand Romneys, and part of this I think the wool is fantastic, but I can't even cover my costs of shearing, as you will appreciate. We have to find a solution and find market-based opportunities, as we tried to do 20 years ago for lamb, for wool, we have to try and do the same thing. If you're asking me about the politics of the wool board, I would officially say no comment. All I would do is that if you are going to do anything on a cooperative basis, do not have county representatives and county boards and national boards and etc. 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 You never make a decision. We have a board of 10 people and no more, and that's about 8 too many. I don't want to, it is being all don't say that. Views on fresh versus frozen. We've tried to air freight carcasses, fresh carcasses to Kuwait during the lockdown. My environmental thought processes say to me that doesn't make any sense at all. It's an inefficient way to move product. It would be better to do it as cuts, and it would be better not to do it as air freight at all. Shipping at the moment, whilst we have our shelf life that we have at 30 days, even though it's frozen, is a challenge to us. Actually, you can't get a shipping container for love nor money at the moment. We've got a load waiting to go to Canada of frozen mutton, and it's not been shipped for 6 weeks because we cannot find a shipping container around the world. There are markets for whom frozen product is what they are looking for. But it's a marketplace where it is difficult to drive added value. But if we can find markets for particularly the 5th quarter and harvest every last bit that we can of the animal, which I think we should be doing from an ethical point of view anyway, then there are some genuine frozen market opportunities around the world where freezing makes the logistics much more practical and cost effective. It costs 15p a kilo to get from here to Japan for frozen lamb. So if you look at that and the difference between the value of dead weight, value of lamb, 3 years ago to where we are today, it's actually not huge amounts of money.
Do you see during COVID that you big demand for local food, do you see that and environmental discussion going on around the country, demanding more local domestic?
There has been increased demand for more local, particularly in certain parts of what shall we class, genteel Middle England, and that's why I flog all my lambs to people around the village and the local pub. Having said that, when you come into the commodity markets, and I think it's a very valuable lesson not only to come to events like this, but actually to go to some different parts of the country and realise some of the pressures that people are under when they eat and make their purchasing decisions. And if you look at a leg of lamb and the investment you've got to make that is to feed your family compared to what you can do in other places, it's very difficult. In the wholesale market that we work in, okay, we cannot drive any added value out of where something comes from. It's authenticity, if you like. That's not the marketplace we operate in. I can see there are opportunities there are. I also know to my own personal expense that trying to launch brands in the retail sector can cost you an awful lot of money. So, once you start to work with distribution hubs, the merchandising of your product, there's many failed brands in the food sector compared to those that succeed. It cost me one house and one divorce through that experience. So some opportunities, it depends. And I'm not against niche marketing opportunities at all. I think the more that we can do there, great. We've tried to focus on the wider land sector. So the question I'm being asked down here is, at what point will the government put the supermarket back in their box. That's your vote, Brendan. I should use that one. Put the supermarket back in their box so that local production has more of an opportunity. The reality of the world is, the business world is, and government policy, I think, are two at quite wide extremes at the moment. And I'm going to make an outrageous political statement. It's very clear to me that policy is made to fulfil headlines that make popularist political points, and it's very far removed from the trading realities. And we know that because of the experience at the beginning of the year and the whole Brexit process. Frankly, we knew not up until the last minute what was going to happen. There were all sorts of things that you could go online and look at which said the information will be coming. You know, we have a system we've moved back to wet signature health certificates that have to be in paper hard copy in multiple languages and sealed with the lorry before it leaves. There's no electronic process in place that we send health certification to Europe. So we've taken a retrograde step. We have a system that is not fit for the 21st century. And we are certainly not going to be global traders in anything whilst we're so far off the pace of what other people are doing around the world. Are the government going to do anything about retailers? My honest opinion, none whatsoever. That, I suppose, is my comment about fantasy and reality. I wish they would, but they won't.
What scope do you believe that Chinese agriculture has to fulfill its own purpose for land and meat products in general?
I think the Romans were very clear about it. Actually, they gave grain to the mob 2,000 years ago because when your own population is hungry, they get stroppy, and that will be the priority because for security. I think food's going to become far more political in the next decade or so. So I think governments will try and become more self-sufficient whilst we hurtle towards a lack of self-sufficiency because it's populist. Whether they are able to do it, I think there'll still be opportunity because dietary preferences in China will change. But anybody who's traded in China or had anything to do with China will know that as soon as you go over to China and take your technology or your idea, a week later they're doing it themselves. So you have to be very careful about how that works. But I do try and take that much more holistic opportunity. But I would leave China to the Kiwis and the Aussies. Their plants are half owned now by Chinese in many cases. You can see the direction of travel. As I've tried to say through all of this hour, it isn't rocket science. Should we be worried by the trade deal in Australia? It doesn't keep me awake at night. Are the Australians going to send lots of lamb here? I hope not. If they sell some lamb here, they might do, but it won't make, I don't think, much of a difference. Far more interesting is when the Aussies can't sell lamb to Kuwait in certain parts of the season, why aren't we selling lamb in Kuwait at that time of year? Now they're already embedded in the market, so we rock up in Kuwait waving our Union Jack, hoping that somebody's going to buy. Perhaps we need to think differently about our approach to those markets that other people are established.
So you suggested like cooperate with Aussies?
That's an interesting thought, isn't that? Absolutely. I think we've got to challenge ourselves to think differently. Because what we've been used to in a market which frankly was protectionist is not going to be the rules of engagement going forward. So we've got to up our act. We've got a massive amount of work to do ourselves. Will the trade deal make the slightest bit of difference to us? It might make a difference to the service sector, but most of the big companies are in Sydney anyway, so I can't really see what the difference that's really making. Far more important to us is keeping access to Europe. That would have been catastrophic. Forget whether it was pretty obvious which way I voted in the referendum. Far more importance to us is the European market. There's still parts of the European market which we as a country have yet to really get a proper foothold. But we have to do it by working with them. The reason the price has dropped over the last 10 days of lamb is because the Spanish lambs have all finished. The lambs that are coming up from Southern Europe have all finished. What's coming in from a growing flock in Eastern Europe is of poor quality and it's drying up. So we've got the demand and the supply equations are shifting. That's why we'll see it just steady. It'll drop, it'll take this hit, and then it will steady.
Would you recommend for our farmers who are all this is bringing some sheep on the farm?
Yeah, what I would suggest is get together with a group of you, 5 or 6 of you, who are having the same thought process, work out what you're going to do, what fits your systems and your farms. I mean, I don't need to talk about the agronomy importance of doing it. I was a multi-enterprise farmer, farmed a bit of everything because it worked, that cyclical process worked. What I would do is I would then come up to the abattoir with the 6 of you and sit down with the team and understand from them what the market opportunities are likely to do. And then before you go and buy your stock, work out what are the best animals to fit your environment that are going to meet that end market need. And then work collectively on things like grading, healthcare, inputs, but do low input systems, forage-based systems, and stay in close contact with the abattoir. If you want to spend every Wednesday morning at the livestock market chatting to your chaps, that's fine, but that'll be the end of the profit.
You talked about technology in the abattoir. Is that
It's basically capital investment. It's mechanising the process rather than having what's largely a manual process. On our lines in Kenilworth in Wales, which do about 10 to 15,000 lambs a week, we employ on the actual killing line about 50 people. In New Zealand, that'll be about 6 people. So it's still quite a manual intervention process. It is different with sheep than, say, pigs, because you've got the genetic diversity of shape of sheep. So you do need an eye, although robotics are getting much, much better at doing some of those things. The key thing in the abattoirs in Australia and New Zealand is they are clean, tiled, little manual intervention, highly invested. We're dealing largely with plant that was built in the 60s and 70s that's been patched up. And that is not the way to achieve a 90-day shelf life. We will have to.